All right, here's the big one, the war between science and the Bible. Are you ready? You know, the Bible isn't unclear on where it stands in creation versus evolution. The Bible tells us that God created the world, and so that ought to be pretty obvious. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, we read this verse, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And then God tells us the process of his creation. It wasn't he used evolution, it was rather he spoke everything into existence. So in Psalm 33, we read this, "For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm." The process of creation was God speaking it all into existence, not evolution. Jesus himself affirms creation and the creation account as being accurate, historical, and literal. So, for example, in Matthew 19, Jesus said this, "At the beginning, the Creator made them male and female." He's affirming creation of Adam and Eve as real people from the very beginning of creation. So here's the thing. Actual science does not dispute that. It does not refute that. Actual science rejects evolution, shows it never occurred. Actual science affirms what the Bible is saying, that God made the world. So I want to look with you at that evidence, the scientific evidence that shows evolution never occurred and that the Bible is accurate, that God made the world by speaking it into existence. So here is the actual science, the evidence that evolution is false, the scientific evidence that creationism is true, is not only biblical, but scientific. There's no dichotomy between the Bible and true science. Both are saying evolution is false. There was once a debate between a creationist and an evolutionist that I got to hear. At one point, the creationist said to the evolutionist, "What is your greatest evidence? What's your greatest scientific evidence for evolution?" And the evolutionist said this. He said, "It's the bones. It's the fossils. The fossils are the greatest evidence for evolution." Well, you might be surprised to know that as we look at the fossil record does not support evolution at all. In fact, the fossil record will shows us that evolution never occurred. If you go to the fossils, we find that there's trillions and trillions of fossils. But the thing is, when you look at the fossils, they are all fully formed. There are no species in transition in the fossil record. Everything is just as you would expect if God created the world. If evolution were true, we should be able to go to the fossil record and find trillions and trillions of species in transition. Instead, we're not finding any of those. They are all missing. And the reason they're missing is because evolution never occurred. So, for example, we find billions and billions of fossils of fish in the fossil record. We find billions of fossils of frogs in the fossil record. And supposedly, according to evolution, fish evolved into frogs. So if we find so many fossils of fish, so many fossils of frogs, we should find so many of the fossils in between the fish and the frog. But instead, we find none. All of the species in transition, which would have been found in the fossil record, are not there because evolution never occurred. Now, evolutionists see this problem themselves, and they've even called these missing transitions missing links. You may have heard the phrase. They admit it. The fossil record is missing the transitions that should have been there. The reason is evolution never occurred. The fossil record is grave evidence against evolution. Amazing that it is touted as great evidence for evolution, when it actually shows creationism to be true. So what about the hominids? This is the supposed ape, half-man creatures that existed as monkeys and apes evolved into people. What about those in the fossil record? Are they there? And the answer is they're not there either. There's no record of hominids in the fossil record. You might say, wait a minute, I've seen lots of diagrams of in-between creatures that in books on evolution. So where did they base that on? Well, you might think that they based it on fossils that they found, skulls that they found, in-between forms that they found, but that's not what they based those on. Instead, all of the supposed hominid finds are based on 4 different things. None of them are transitional forms found in the fossil record of monkeys to people. Instead, here's the 4 categories of what they found and then made diagrams of creatures out of these. The first category is that they found little bits of essentially nothing, but built an entire character around it, with diagram and everything else. A famous example of that would be Nebraska Man. Nebraska Man existed for 14 years, with evolutionists telling us, we have these finds, we have the record, we have the fossils for it, but instead Nebraska Man turned out to be based upon one tooth, and it was the tooth of a pig. They've since abandoned Nebraska Man. They've abandoned most of what they once touted as creatures that they have finds for. Lucy is another famous find in this category. Lucy was based upon a few fragments found 2 miles apart, placed together, hardly resembling anything, and all you see is the diagram. The second category of supposed hominids are finds that are actually extinct monkeys or apes that no longer exist anymore. There are about 260 species of monkeys and apes that exist today. It's estimated that in the past there could have been a whole lot others that are extinct. And so what can happen is someone finds one of those skulls, and since they don't look exactly like a modern monkey or ape, they place it in the category of hominid, when really it's just in the category of extinct monkey or ape. The Australopithecus finds that you see in the charts belong in that category. They don't look exactly like a modern monkey or ape, but it's because they are ones that went extinct. That's all they are, fully monkey, fully ape, not in between, gone extinct. A third category of the supposed hominids is simply that they found modern human being skulls that maybe were deformed in some way, or a little bit larger than average or smaller than average. So, for example, the Neanderthal finds turned out are just modern human beings. Those skulls, all in the same area, suffered from vitamin D deficiency and arthritis, and were therefore oddly shaped. They took the oddly shaped skulls and said, we've got evidence of a hominid. Oddly shaped, don't look like people, don't look like monkeys. That's their middle category. But instead, that belongs in the people category. Just deformed. That's all it is. And the fourth category of supposed hominids is simply hoaxes that have existed over the years. Let me give you a real famous hoax. It was of a hominid known as Duane Man. Duane Man existed in textbooks and taught all over the world for 41 years as a hominid find. After they examined the find a little closer, it turned out that all it was a human skull and a jawbone of an ape placed together so that it would be found and called a hominid. They've since eliminated that from their records as well, as they have eliminated so many from their list of hominids. All of them should be eliminated because they all fit in those four categories. There is no evidence in the fossil record of any ape man, and there's no evidence in the modern day of any ape man. And in the same way, there's no evidence in the fossil record of any transitional links at all. So the fossil record is very, very compelling, very, very clear, very, very obvious evidence of creationism. Very, very against and counter to evolution. If people look at the fossil record and really examine it, they should come to creationism, not to evolution. So with the fossil record showing evolution never occurred, you would think that scientists have scientific laws that show evolution has occurred. That they've got maybe a law of evolution or some other law that shows this is what happened, we evolved. Well, you might be surprised to realize they do not have any scientific laws to demonstrate evolution. In fact, there are scientific laws to show that evolution never occurred. I want to share with you 4 laws of science that demonstrate evolution never happened. And these 4 laws are accepted universally by scientists on both sides of the aisle as being correct and true. But all 4 show us evolution could never have happened. So here's the first one. First one is known as the first law of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics, which means heat energy, first law of heat energy, states that in a system, the energy is going to remain equal. Now, that may sound kind of complicated, but it's as simple as this. If you're going to build a house, you need material and labor that's going to be equal to the energy of the end product, the house. In other words, you're not just going to get a house from nothing. You're going to need the material and the labor that's going to equal in energy the house. So evolution states that we got something from nothing, and then that something developed in complexity over time by itself. That means that in the system, there has been an increase in energy over time. According to the first law of thermodynamics, that is not possible, inasmuch as a house cannot go up by itself. In the same way then, evolution could not have occurred, because the first law of thermodynamics asks, where's the energy going into the system producing the increase in energy? It's not there. Here's the second law of thermodynamics, and it states this: anything left to itself is going to decay and degenerate over time. So think of a simple example. If a branch breaks off of a tree and is on the ground, what's going to happen to it over time? It's going to decay, it's going to rot, and it's going to become dust eventually and be gone. It will get worse over time, not better. That's the second law of thermodynamics. That applies to everything. It will get left to itself, it will get worse over time, not better. Think about that. Evolution says the opposite. Left to itself, things will get better, more complex over time. Second law of thermodynamics, left to itself, things will get worse over time. What is science saying? Evolution could not have occurred according to the second law of thermodynamics. Evolution could not have occurred according to the first law of thermodynamics. Here's another law countering evolution, saying it could never happen. It's known as the law of biogenesis. This is a simple one to observe. The law simply states that all living things only come from pre-existing living things. So, you all have parents. You couldn't have come into existence without parents. It's true of every living thing, even one-celled organisms living, anything living, had to have come from a previous existing living thing. That is the law of biogenesis. No living things can come from inanimate objects. Okay, so what does evolution say? The opposite of that. Evolution says that at some point in the past, you had gases, or however the story goes, however the specifics go, you have this conclusion that at some point you got living things from non-living things. Law of biogenesis and science says that could never occur, that has never occurred, and that will never occur. Evolution and the law of biogenesis are in conflict because evolution violates the law of biogenesis, but the law of biogenesis has no exceptions. The law of biogenesis itself says evolution never occurred. Let me give you a fourth law of science, and it's known as the DNA code. So in your body, in every cell of your body, there's a DNA code. The DNA code is basically a library's worth of information describing your physical makeup. It's voluminous in every cell of your body. The thing about your DNA is it doesn't change. It's like a blueprint for a building. If builders are following a blueprint, then the building is going to follow exactly what the blueprint says. You've got DNA, it's your blueprint, your body follows it. It cannot vary from the blueprint. So even if you wanted to adapt to your environment better and become more complex, you can't become that physically because your blueprint is determining what you are becoming. Take a giraffe, for example. Even if it wanted to have a longer neck to get higher leaves, it couldn't over millions of years develop that because it has a DNA giving it a certain length of neck, and it must follow the DNA. According to your DNA code, you cannot, you have not, and you will not evolve. You will follow the blueprint. You will follow the DNA code that is in every cell of your body. You will not deviate. You will not evolve from it, even over millions of years. Okay, so we've seen that the scientific laws demonstrate evolution never occurred. It should start to get a little puzzling as to why this is called scientific at all. We've seen the scientific laws show it never occurred, and we saw that the fossil record shows evolution never occurred. So the fossil record and the laws of science say that creationism is true. Now I want to share with you two scientific arguments that show evolution never occurred. These arguments are called the cosmological argument and the teleological argument. Cosmological argument and the teleological argument. So the cosmological argument states this, that for anything to begin to exist, it must have a cause, causing it to exist. It can't just pop into existence. It's really common sense. I mean, if you sat at your desk and waited for something to pop into existence, you'd be waiting forever. Something has to cause it to happen. And so it's all well and good to say this world began with some big bang and there were these gases and somehow that was the beginning. But scientifically, logically, that actually makes no sense. Because we can ask this, where did the gases come from for that to happen? Or where did the space come from for that to happen? Something had to cause it to come into existence. That cause has to itself be uncaused or eternal. So an eternal being had to cause the origin of the world. Otherwise, you are violating the cosmological argument and you are violating logic to say something can pop into existence on its own. Now, the teleological argument is related to that because now when we look at the created world that had to come into existence by an eternal being, you have complexity in this creation. This world is so complex that it is impossible to think that randomness and chance could bring it about. For example, we just talked about DNA in all the cells of your body. Well, your body has about 75 trillion cells. And the same DNA, like a library's worth of information, is in every one of your 75 trillion cells. So in every one of the cells, you've got a library's worth of information. That is incredibly complex. That can't happen by chance or randomness. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine if you had a paper factory and an ink factory and they were next to each other. Then one day there was a giant explosion and the paper went everywhere and the ink went everywhere. Well, you're going to have a big old mess after that. But instead, we don't find a big old mess when we look at creation. We see libraries and libraries worth of information. So now, imagine the paper goes everywhere, the ink goes everywhere, and lo and behold, out of that chaos and that randomness, a library formed with all these books, with the ink falling just in the right place to form books with incredible knowledge. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen from chaos. That's not going to happen from randomness. The only way you're going to get a library's worth of information is because you've got an intelligent designer giving you that information in that. It doesn't come about by randomness. You're not going to get a library by chaos. You're not going to get a library by randomness. It had to be that you have a designer if you've got design. If you've got intelligence, you've got an intelligent designer. That's what we're seeing when we look at the creation. That's what we're seeing when we look at the complexity of creation. It couldn't have happened by chance. It didn't happen by chance. It didn't happen by randomness. It was put there. It had to have been. That's the teleological argument. It is a scientific argument demonstrating evolution to be false. The cosmological argument also demonstrating evolution to be false. In response to that, often evolutionists will say, yeah, but anything can happen over millions of years. Well, the impossible, even given millions of years, is still impossible. Think of it like this. If a frog becomes a prince overnight, it's a fairy tale. But if a frog becomes a prince over millions of years, it's evolution. Millions of years can't turn a fairy tale into something that's true. When all is said and done, the teleological argument and the cosmological argument make evolution a fairy tale that even millions of years can't change. In regards to the millions of years that you keep having evolutionists say, we've been around that long and so forth, truth is, there are 300 dating methods out there for dating these things and how long people have been around and so forth. Did you know that 290 of those dating methods demonstrate people have not been around as long as they say they are or haven't been around very long at all? But evolutionists need that time for all of this to occur. So what they've done is to cherry pick the dating methods that support the age they already thought they should have and ignore all the rest. Other times what they'll do is they'll point to some phenomena in the world and say, look, this had to have happened for over millions of years. Let me give you two examples of that. They'll say, you know, it takes millions of years for the light from stars to reach the earth, millions of years. So since the light is hitting the earth, we can see the starlight, then we know that this has been going on for millions of years. But watch the logic of that. God could have created the light from stars already shining on the earth when he first made the stars. It really is not a problem at all to think of it logically that way. Let me give you another phenomena that they use. It's the Grand Canyon. They say, look at the Grand Canyon. It was created by a little bit of water over millions and millions of years. Look what you've got and you can see it. It's evidence for it. Well, the truth is, instead of millions of years creating the Grand Canyon and things like it, a large catastrophe could create something like the Grand Canyon in a very short period of time. I'll give you an example. In 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted. And after it erupted, in the space of 4 hours, it created a 600-foot strata into the earth. 4 hours, 600 feet. Something like the Grand Canyon could have been created over a very short period of time if there was a giant catastrophe like a worldwide flood. So all the evidence used to support a very old Earth and lots of people being around for very long periods of time really doesn't hold up when you examine it more closely. You know, even if the Earth is old, even if they were to be able to date it as old, think about this. It is possible that God created the world a short time ago and He just made it with age. And that would actually make sense, don't you think? Because when Adam and Eve were made, on the first day, they weren't, babies or embryos. They were adults. God created people with age from day one. And therefore, God may have created the earth with age, but it's not very old. He just made it with age a short time ago. So what we're seeing is that as science advances, it keeps getting worse and worse for evolution, not better. As science grows and learns and develops, we find more and more evidence against evolution, not for it. Let me give you an example of that. In 1925, there was the famous Scopes trial, which supposedly it pitted evolution versus creation, and supposedly evolution won. And then we got evolution in the public schools and so forth. Did you know if you go back to that trial and you look at the evidence, the scientific evidence that was used that convinced everyone, that evidence, even by the scientific community, has now been debunked? They don't use any of that evidence anymore. That is the reality of what's going on out there. Science doesn't support evolution, it comes against it, and the more we learn about science, the more it comes against it. So why is it getting taught so prominently out there as proven by science? Why is it getting taught that if you disagree, you must be an unscientific fool? Why? Because people think about the alternative. If evolution is false, there is one alternative. The world was made. And if the world was made, then there's a creator. Okay, now, if there's a creator, then you're accountable to the creator. You're the creation. And so people who are rejecting God don't want evolution to be false at all. It's got to be true. Otherwise, they may have to examine their life. And they may have to examine their disbelief in God, or the way they're responding to Him, or the way that they're living, and they don't want to do that. So instead what they do is to say, evolution's been proven, don't even examine it, we've got the conclusion, and it's true. And if you examine it, they'll say that you're an unscientific fool. Well, the reality is, go ahead and examine it. And when you do, you will find that the conclusion they were giving you was not backed by the evidence. That the evidence is clearly with creationism. The scientific evidence is clearly with creation, not evolution. And it is not just that creationism is in the Bible, it is in the science as well. I want to share with you this quote by an evolutionist named Arthur Keith. Arthur Keith said this: "Evolution is unproved and unprovable." He says, "We believe it only because the alternative is special creation, which is unthinkable." Why do they believe it? Because the evidence compels them? No. They believe it because the alternative, creationism, a creator, God, is unthinkable to them. It's not the science that's compelling them to believe. It's perhaps their lifestyle. It's their bias against God. That's what's compelling them to believe. The actual science would compel them to reject evolution, not embrace it. Most people who believe in evolution have never even examined the evidence. Imagine if they did. Most of the things that I showed you today, most people have never even heard. And yet, they embrace evolution. And that is called, in logic, the argument from authority, which means you believe something to be true, not because of the evidence, but because an authority told you it was true. Many in the scientific community have told you it is true, and if you have not examined it yourself, then you're embracing the argument from authority. You're accepting the authority without actually looking at the evidence. Truth is, there are scientists who are creationists, and there are scientists who are evolutionists, and what should get done is that both sides get taught. And if both sides get taught, the science for creation, the supposed science for evolution, if both sides get taught, I think there's going to be a clear winner in the minds of the public, and that is creationism is supported by science, and evolution is not. Instead, most people have never heard both sides. I'm glad that today you've joined with us and you've heard some things people never hear. You've heard a scientific defense for creationism. And I'm glad you've heard it. And I trust that as you examine this even further, you will see that the more you examine, the more you look, the more you study, the more you're going to see that both the Bible and science teach that the world was created by God and that evolution is false. In Job chapter 38, verse 4, God said this to Job: "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth?" When you think about it, none of these scientists who are saying evolution is true were there. But God was. God can tell us what exactly happened. He was the only one there. And He has told us exactly what has happened. He made the world by speaking it into existence a short time ago. If you've liked this video, I want to encourage you to subscribe to this channel, to share it, to press the like button. Let other people see it. Let's get the word out. Let's get the other side of the debate out on this issue. Thank you for being with us, for joining in. We're building a wonderful community here, and I'm so glad that you're a part with us. And remember, for every question, there's always an answer.